Welcome to Business Authority Radio, bringing you insights from today's thought leaders, professionals, and influencers. With your hosts, Neil Howe and Craig Williams.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Neil Howe, and today my special guest is Stephen Weisberg. Now, there's three different types of people who can represent you before the IRS, and they are attorneys, certified public accountants, and enrolled agents. Now, attorneys are uniquely qualified. They possess a skill set that CPAs and EAs do not have. And attorney Stephen Weisberg is a strong negotiator and a zealous client advocate. And he is our guest today, and he's going to share some information that anybody that is having trouble with the IRS is going to need to hear. So welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you, Neil. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get right to the information here. Obviously, if somebody is having a problem with the IRS, they're going to be very frantic and looking for answers. So we want to get as many answers from you as possible today, Stephen. But tell us first a little bit about your business, the W Tax Group, and what kind of clients that you really help.
Sure. So as you said, my business is called the W Tax Group, and it started from a one-man shop of me, myself, and I, and has grown to be a nationwide player representing clients all over the country. The type of clients that I represent really are anyone with a tax debt. But a lot of those clients are self-employed. Those clients are, business contractors, truck drivers, hairstylists, anyone who's self-employed. There's a lot of issues that they have in terms of not making estimated payments or not being clear as to what payments they need to make to the IRS because they're not getting a paycheck. And obviously, when you get a paycheck, the taxes come right out of your paycheck, so you don't have to think about it. I also represent business owners and their businesses with income tax issues for the business, as well as payroll tax issues, which are 940, 941 issues. That the business owner is supposed to be holding in trust for the IRS and then sending to the IRS. And so it's not really the business owner's money, but there are times when business owners may take that money from the client's paycheck and then use it for something else. If they have a vendor that they need to pay or something like that, and they're in dire straits, they may pay the vendor with money that really is supposed to be sent to the IRS. And that creates a snowball effect where they owe the IRS and they're trying to play catch up. So business owners are a class of individuals that I represent very strongly and help them resolve their issues.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be a lot more sole proprietors and more people having that entrepreneurial spirit right now and going out and creating businesses on their own. But there is that part of the business and running the business that requires sitting down and looking at the numbers. And oftentimes that's not something, especially an entrepreneur, wants to do. So what kind of problems specifically are they running into that gets them into trouble?
Well, just to kind of follow up on what I said previously, is they don't know necessarily how much that they need to pay to the IRS on a quarterly basis for what are called estimated taxes. If you have a job with a paycheck, the taxes that you owe to the IRS just come right out of your paycheck, as most people know, and they're probably not too happy about it when they see their paycheck and they see a bunch of taxes that have come out. Mm-hmm. But it's done automatically for you when you have a paycheck. And when you are a self-employed individual, you don't have a paycheck where taxes are taken out. And so you need to pay the IRS on a quarterly basis. They're called estimated taxes. If you don't, no one's going to say anything until you file your tax return at the end of the year. And it turns out you haven't paid anything to the IRS, and you have a huge tax bill that you then need to pay. Now, if you haven't saved up a lot of money to pay for those taxes because no one was taking it out of your check or forcing you to send it to the IRS, you could really be in a lot of trouble because you don't have the money at the end of the year, and you may have used it for living expenses without really understanding that that money was for the IRS, and you needed to save a portion of your income to pay the taxes at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think when you have money coming into your bank account, I think there's studies out there that most people spend 110% of the money that they have. So whatever's in the bank account, they're going to spend, and then at the end of the year, they get in trouble. So give me an example. There's hundreds and thousands of truck drivers out there that are probably in this position. What happens at the end of the year when they get that letter from the IRS saying that they owe X amount of dollars and they don't have it?
Well, I should say, before we even get to the IRS with regard to truck drivers specifically, because this is an issue they run into, is with their state that they live in. When they don't have the money and they're filing tax returns, or just not filing the tax returns, but if they're filing tax returns and showing an outstanding balance and they're not paying, the state can make it so that they won't be able to renew their tabs, won't be able to renew their license. And obviously, if you're a truck driver, that is your livelihood. You're not going to be able to operate and to work for a living anymore without your license. So that's a really big issue that a lot of truck drivers run into with the state. With regard to the IRS and the federal government, nothing specifically is going to happen with regard to your license or anything like that when you owe at the end of the year, but you're going to have a balance at the end of the year that you need to pay. And once you have a balance at the end of the year that you were supposed to pay to the IRS, penalties and interest start accruing. The penalties can be up to almost 50% of the entire amount that you owe to the IRS. They'll tack on another almost 50% in penalties. So it's a huge number. And then people are, they owe they thought they owed, let's say, $10,000. Then they're actually another 50%, that maybe they owe $15,000 with penalties. So it's really a snowball effect that they continue to owe and they're not paying. And then at some point, the IRS very strongly comes after truck drivers or anyone else who owes to them, comes after them with enforced collection activity. They can garnish your wages. They can take money from even third parties who are paying to you. They can take all of the money in your bank account. And so you need to be protected against these types of enforcement collections that the IRS has. And the IRS is really the largest and strongest and most powerful collections agency on the entire planet. The rules for them don't necessarily, I should say the rules for other creditors who you may owe money to don't necessarily apply to the IRS. It's not like the IRS has to go and get a judgment in court against you and then you're going to owe to them. I mean, the minute that you owe money to the IRS and you file that return, the IRS has a de facto judgment against you and a lien against all of your assets, including your home and any other personal assets that you have.
That is a pretty scary prospect. So in the case where people do owe the IRS and can't afford it, what are the solutions there other than the IRS coming in and taking everything that they have?
Right. And I want to expand a little bit on what you said about it being a scary prospect. I mean, this entire process of owing the IRS and just even making sure that you're paying the IRS the right amount before you owe, it's a very, very scary process. It's a psychological roller coaster for people. And that's really one of the reasons why I got into this business. I could see so many business owners and individuals who were stuck, basically not sleeping, looking over their shoulder all the time, having no idea what they need to do, but just feeling very, very anxious all the time because they owe money to the IRS and they feel like the IRS is going to come get them at some point. The IRS will send notices to you. It makes people nervous. Some people don't even open their mail because they're so nervous about, what the mail might say from the IRS. And so I really focus on my clients' feelings, and they're really being very afraid about the IRS and what to do. And I understand where they're coming from. I understand why they're so afraid. And to be honest, they have reason to be afraid because, like I said, the IRS is very powerful. And that's where I step in. I'm able to help them resolve their cases. Some of the ways, there's a few different ways, that you can resolve cases where you owe outstanding balances to the IRS. And it's a very strategic way about getting these things resolved. But to make short of it, there are monthly payment plans that the IRS will allow you to go on if you owe money to the IRS. Now, you'll still have penalties and interest that accrue, so you have to remember that. But there are monthly payment plans. There's also what's called a partial pay installment agreement, which is a monthly payment plan, but it's a monthly payment plan where myself as the attorney will take the numbers, the financials of the taxpayer, make sure that we present the most favorable outcome to the IRS. And we have the taxpayer then pay the IRS a small amount of money that they can afford to pay, or we're really dictating how much they can pay. And at the end of the day, the taxpayer will never pay off the total amount of the debt that they owe to the IRS. Without getting too technical about it, the IRS has 10 years to collect debt from any taxpayer. So if you're only paying in a partial pay installment agreement, if you're only paying, let's say, $50 a month, but you owe $100,000, over a 10-year period, you'll never end up paying off the total amount of the debt. So in fact, you're basically making a deal with the IRS, and you're paying a portion of the total amount that you owe without ever paying the entire amount. Those are two very good solutions. One other solution that I want to touch on quickly that probably a lot of taxpayers have heard because it's used as a marketing technique is called the Offer and Compromise program. And the Offer and Compromise program, there's a lot of tax firms out there that like to use the Offer and Compromise program as some sort of godsend that everyone's going to qualify for it and it's going to fix all of your problems. That's not really true. But how the Offer and Compromise program works, and some people are most definitely eligible for it, how it works is you offer the IRS an amount of money to get rid of your entire tax debt. Sounds simplistic when I say it like that, but it's very formulaic. There are specific forms that need to be filled out. There's a specific way of presenting the offer to the IRS to make sure it gets accepted. But at the end of the day, I've had clients that have paid $200 to get rid of a $40,000 tax debt. And you have to remain compliant after that offer is accepted, meaning you have to file all your tax returns. You can't be delinquent on paying the taxes that are owed. But like I said, I've had clients that have paid $200 to get rid of a $40,000 tax debt. I've had a truck driver just recently pay $2,000 to get rid of a $50,000 tax debt. So the Offer and Compromise program can be very beneficial to people, but I just want to reiterate, not everyone is eligible for it. And the reason I reiterate that is because there are many large national tax resolution firms that are really using fraudulent marketing, and the government is keen to this. They see that this marketing is fraudulent, but I have clients that get letters from marketing from the marketing of these large tax firms, and they say, "Hey, we can resolve your case for 10 cents on the dollar," and this is basically a total lie. They're making up something so that they can get the taxpayer to call them and say, "Okay, I need your help." So you have to be very careful about those notices and what you agree to when you're speaking to tax firms. Again, that's another reason why I got into this business. I saw so much fraudulent activity going on that I felt like it just wasn't fair to taxpayers, and I wanted to provide an alternative where taxpayers felt very comfortable. We were very forthright, and we weren't making up, to be honest, lies about what was available to them. We make sure that all of our taxpayer clients have an idea, or actually not an idea, know exactly what we're going to do for them, how we're going to do it, and potentially what the solutions are.
Mm-hmm. So it's good to know that there are solutions. So when you get in trouble, you can negotiate, I suppose, with the IRS, but not in every case. You really got to know what you're doing. So let's talk about some of the misconceptions. I know you've touched on some of them, But is there a misconception that people can handle this themselves?
There is that misconception. Now, what I think is, you're basic. If you're representing yourself, you're coming to a poker game without knowing the rules of the game, and there's no reason that your taxpayers should know the rules, because they're not dealing with the IRS on a daily basis like I am. If you try to call the IRS on your own, you might be able to get into a resolution of your case. So I'm not going to pretend like you can't get a resolution, but it's certainly, number one, not going to be the best resolution. And number two, the IRS is going to try to take advantage of you because you don't know the rules and the administrative laws that they are required to adhere to. And, again, that's where I come in. I have a long experience in tax resolution and handling tax debts, and I know the Internal Revenue Manual inside and out. So I know what the IRS is required to do. If you call on your own, you don't know what they're required to do. They're not going, and they don't have any requirement to tell you what their requirements are. They're not required to tell you, you have a right to X, Y, and Z. They're just going to try to collect as much as they can from you as possible. As I said, they're the most powerful collection agency on the planet. They are trained to collect money. They're not trained to help taxpayers get the best deal possible for their own economic well-being.
So obviously, yes, the IRS doesn't have your best interest at heart as a taxpayer, but that's why you need a tax attorney like yourself, Stephen, to be in their corner, somebody that knows the steps to take and doesn't make mistakes, which will cost. But let's talk about some of the fears. And I know it's very emotional, like you said before, when you get in trouble. But what stops people from doing what they should in the first place and, just paying those taxes as they go? Or what stops people from actually addressing it and handling it themselves, do they think that it's just going to go away if they ignore it?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's really deep into psychology more than anything else. In my view, I don't think that taxpayers believe it's going to go away, but it's more of, listen, I'm going to stick my head in the sand and I'm going to hope that they're not going to come after me. Mm-hmm. That's really what I think the psychology is. And as I discussed before, let's just talk about someone who has a self-employed individual who has to make estimated payments. If you're using the money that you're supposed to be sending to the IRS for taxes, and you're using that money for your own lifestyle, people just think, listen, I need it. I can't afford to send the money to the IRS. I need it for my own lifestyle. And I'll kind of just kick the can down the road and hope that the IRS doesn't come after me. And one of the things that is really a good thing, but also hurts taxpayers with this psychology, is that the IRS there's a due process here. The IRS has certain requirements that they have to abide by before they can start collecting. So there's a certain notice sequence. They'll send multiple letters out to you. And so I think one of the things that happens, especially for the people who are putting their head in the sand and just saying, I hope the IRS doesn't come after me, is that they're getting these notices, but they're not being aggressively, the IRS isn't aggressively coming after them yet because the IRS has certain requirements before they can do that. And so I think a lot of people think, well, the IRS is sending me all these notices. I understand I owe the money to them, but the IRS isn't doing anything, so I have nothing to worry about. And then before you know it, once all these notices come out and the IRS meets their requirements, the next day someone sees their bank account has been totally drained. And it comes as a shock to them, although it maybe it shouldn't, but it comes as a shock because they were thinking, I was getting all these notices and nothing was happening, and so I thought I was okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why people don't address these issues.
So what's the first thing that somebody should do when they get that notice from the IRS? And what does it look like? What is the verbiage of the letter that if somebody gets it and opens it, how do they know that they're in trouble and they need to take action right away?
Well, I guess what I would first say is if you are going to file a tax, if you're going to owe money to the IRS and you know ahead of time, you're not going to owe them, you're not going to be able to pay the money to the IRS. Number one, you still need to file a tax return because, and a lot of people don't do that because they're saying, oh, listen, I know I'm going to owe money and I can't pay it, so why file the tax return? But you want to file the tax return because the penalties for not filing a tax return are actually the largest penalties out of all of them. So you want to file that tax return, even if you can't pay. It's not going to make a difference if you decide, oh, I'm not going to file. It doesn't help you in any way. It only hurts you, and it also, like I said, that only makes you susceptible to these high penalties. But let's say you filed the tax return and you know you're not going to be able to pay. You should address the issue right there and then. Hire someone to help you come up with a plan for paying that tax debt back to the IRS, whether it's through a payment agreement, whether it's through, well, like I said, a partial payment agreement, or whether it's an offer in compromise that we need to do. You should address it right then before the notices even ever come out. That's really the first step. Don't again, bury your head in the sand. Right there and then, when you know you're not going to be able to pay the IRS, you should take proactive steps to speak to a tax professional and determine what solutions may be available to you.
Mm-hmm. So let's do a case study. Somebody that you've helped that might spring to mind. Tell us what the problem was. Obviously, we know they're in an emotional state when they get these kinds of letters, but what was their problem? What were they dealing with? How were you able to solve that problem? And ultimately, what was the outcome for them?
Sure. Just recently, which I think I mentioned before, but it just comes to mind because it was just a recent case. We had a truck driver that owed money to the IRS. Number one, they owed money to the IRS. Number two, he hadn't filed in years. So he had, maybe 7 years of tax returns that he hadn't filed. And the notices started coming from the IRS. He kind of didn't want to deal with it. But at a certain point, he actually wasn't garnished by the IRS, meaning they didn't actually take money out of his bank account. But at a certain point, he realized he needed to do something about this because the notices were getting stronger and stronger. And I guess the word is scarier for him. Mm-hmm. So what we were able to do for him is, bring him in and talk to him and say, listen, this is what we need to do for you, and come up with steps moving forward. And I think that's really something that's very helpful, is that a lot of people have no idea where to start. And so just having the discussion about what we need to do moving forward and what steps are necessary to create a resolution makes people feel at ease, because they then feel like, okay, at least I have a plan here, and I'm able to follow that plan with the help of the tax attorney. And we talked about solutions. Every taxpayer there's a solution available to them. Now, they might not like exactly what the solution is, and you want the most favorable one, but there is a way to resolve everyone's tax case one way or another. So we had this truck driver, and he, like I said, he had 7 years of tax returns that need to be filed. We prepared all the tax returns for him and sent them to the IRS. We had put an administrative hold on his account. So we spoke to the IRS, told them, listen, we are representing Mr. So-and-so. He has 7 years of tax returns that need to be prepared. We need some time to prepare these tax returns so we can get him a little bit of time before any sort of collection action or bank levies or wage garnishments occurs. So we were able to keep the IRS at bay while we're preparing the tax returns. We ultimately prepared the tax returns, and then we were able to get him into an offer in compromise. And so what he needed to do with us was provide us all of his financials. It's almost like applying for a mortgage. We go over income, we go over expenses, we go over equity and assets, we go over the ability to access equity and assets. And we bring all of that to the table, And once we look at it, we are able to massage the numbers in a way that are most favorable to the taxpayer. And we know exactly what the IRS is looking for. So we make sure that the numbers are presented in a way that's going to result in the best possible economic outcome for that taxpayer. And in this particular case, we filed an offer in compromise for him after we had filed the tax returns. It takes, for offer in compromise, it's actually a long process because the IRS is so backed up. But, we send it in, we hear back from the IRS within about 7 months. We then negotiated with the IRS with regard to this offer in compromise about what the appropriate offer would be to wipe away his entire tax debt of about $45,000. And ultimately, we were able to come to a resolution where this truck driver was able to pay $2,000 to wipe away a tax debt of $45,000. So sounds like a pretty good deal to me. At the end of the day, I mean, he was very happy with the outcome, and he wouldn't have been able to do it on his own. He was so, frightened and just stuck, almost frozen without being able to do anything. We were able to put a plan together for him, and we were able to execute and get him an offer where he saved a large chunk of money that he would have otherwise, had kind of looming over him for a very long time.
Right. And it seems like that would be a fairly normal case where people are paralyzed in fear and they just do nothing. They freeze and they do nothing, which is a problem. You also mentioned that, the IRS is way behind and it took 7 months just to get a reply. Is it important that the taxpayer continues, even if they have past bad debt, that they continue to pay current taxes?
Yes, that's actually, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's very important. The IRS will not negotiate with the taxpayer until the taxpayer ultimately gets into what they call compliance, meaning that if they're supposed to make estimated payments, that they're making their quarterly estimated payments, that they filed their tax returns that are outstanding, and that they paid on tax returns or taxes that they're owed moving forward. So the first thing we really want to do is make sure that, and that's why we had to prepare those tax returns for the truck drivers. We want to make sure that moving forward, you have to pick a date and say, listen, moving forward, I am going to be compliant with the IRS. And I'm going to pay the taxes that I owe. I'm going to file timely. I'm going to do everything by the book. And from that date, when you make that decision, moving forward, you have to abide by that. Otherwise, the IRS will not negotiate with you. And even if you have for example, in this example, the truck driver had the offer in compromise accepted. If he does not stay in compliance moving forward, if he does not make payments moving forward, he does not file returns appropriately moving forward, the offer goes away. And so the settlement that he received of $2,000 on a $45,000 debt, that's totally wiped away, and that $45,000 is back on the books.
Mm-hmm. And is there a limit for that? As far as a 5-year, 10-year, have to be in good standing? Or
for an offer in compromise specifically, it's 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're on a payment plan that's going to be a 10-year, I discussed a partial pay installment agreement. If you're going to be on that payment plan for 10 years, you have to be current that entire time.
Right. Or it goes back on.
Exactly. You'll be kicked out of that payment plan. You'll be back where you started.
Mm-hmm. So obviously it's extremely important to have somebody like yourself, Stephen, work on a case like this to get the outcome that the taxpayer is looking for. But when evaluating a tax attorney, what is the important thing for somebody to be looking for?
Well, as you, I think, alluded to at the beginning of this discussion, was that there are other professionals that can represent you besides the tax attorney. There's enrolled agents, there's CPAs, and there's also tax attorneys. But you need to, whoever you hire, you need to make sure that they have the experience. A lot of times CPAs, enrolled agents, they want to prepare tax returns and they don't want to get involved in helping their clients resolve past debt issues. It's most CPAs and enrolled agents don't want to do that. And they don't have the expertise to do that. So tax attorneys specifically, listen, my company, we only resolve tax debts. That's our specialty. We don't deal with, corporate issues, mergers and acquisitions, anything you can think of. We don't do that. We only do tax resolutions for outstanding tax debt. And so you need to make sure someone has the experience and has a good reputation. There are so many, I want to touch on the reputation issue, even tax attorneys out there, but there are so many firms out there who claim to be one thing and are another thing. There are firms that are really just sales firms, and they're just trying to bring in as much money as possible. They're in the business of sales. They're not in the business of helping taxpayers resolve their issues. You need to speak to the tax attorney. You need to make sure you feel comfortable with the tax attorney. You need to make sure that he or she has the experience. You need to look at reviews online to see what other people have had, what kind of experiences they've had with the tax attorney. You need to do a lot of due diligence. And at the end of the day, my suggestion is a tax attorney is the best for you, a tax attorney with experience in this realm, because I know the ins and the outs of the Internal Revenue Manual. I know what the IRS is required to do. I know how to proactively create a solution to your case. And I know strategically if one circumstance arises, I know how to deal with that. And then if another circumstance arises, I know how to deal with that based upon my knowledge of the Internal Revenue Manual and how the IRS operates. So you want to make sure that you have a comfortable feeling with the tax attorney and that you feel that his or her experience is really up to par, because there are just too many clients that I have now and just in general that have really been duped by other professionals in this industry. And basically these other professionals have taken their money and not done anything for them. You need to be very careful. And my suggestion would be to hire a tax attorney, whether it's me or it's someone else. You need to hire a tax attorney so you can have the proper representation. You can have an advocate on your side, someone who knows exactly what they're doing, isn't flying by the seat of their pants.
Right. And, it sounds like you are a specialist in this one thing that you do. There's a lot of tax attorneys out there or tax companies out there that, do a little bit of everything, but that's not necessarily who you want to represent you. So, Stephen, you're based in Southfield, Michigan. Is that correct?
Yes, just north of Detroit.
Okay, great. So obviously there's people around there that locally you represent, but you also represent nationwide as well. So tell our audience, please, what the best way to get in touch with you and your firm is.
The best way is to go to our website, and that's wtaxattorney.com. So I'll just repeat that. That's wtaxattorney.com. You can contact us by filling out the forms on our website. The website also has, our different telephone numbers, and you can contact us very easily through the website. I'll even give you my direct number if you'd like to have it. My direct number is 248-971-0885. That's 248-971-0885. The 248 is a Michigan area code. But as you just mentioned, we represent clients all over the country. You don't need to live in Michigan. We have the ability and the accreditation to represent clients all over the country, and a large percentage of our clients are throughout the country, not just here in Michigan. But go to our website, wtaxattorney.com.
Well, it's been a very enjoyable interview, Stephen. I have certainly learned a lot, as I'm sure our listeners have as well. So, Stephen Weisberg, thank you very much for being a guest on Business Authority Radio today.
Thanks, Neil. Again, I appreciate you having me.
And to our listening audience, if you like what you hear, hit that like button and share, and we'll see you next time on the show.
You've been listening to Business Authority Radio with Neil Howe and Greg Williams. To learn more about the resources mentioned in today's show or to listen to past episodes, visit businessauthorityradio.com.